everybody. Welcome back to Alex and Panda Revisit Steven Universe. I'm Trans Panda. I'm currently fronting Annie, fictive of the character from Batman the Animated Series. And this is Alex.
Hello, Annie. Hello, everyone.
Hi. Today's episode was Season 1, Episode 12, Giant Woman. I guess we'll go on with the synopsis. So
Please.
today, it starts out with Amethyst and Pearl having a checkers match with each other, where Steven tries to raise the stakes by throwing water balloons at them every time they get a bad turn, quote unquote. Which, when you really think about it, would immediately defeat the purpose if you lost once, because what's the second one after you've already been hit by a water balloon, you know? Just a thought, but anyway,
Let's not dwell on it.
I'll not dwell on it. It's basically a quick metaphor to convey that Amethyst and Pearl don't exactly get along or are in sync as much as they could be, and that's when they drop that it's why they quote unquote don't fuse into Opal any. Why was it fuse into Opal or just like I think it was just fuse into Opal, yeah.
Yes.
Steven comes rushing down wondering what the heck Opal is and is very excited over the measure where they explain the concepts of fusion to Steven. It's basically where two gems, when they manage to synchronize together enough, they combine their physical forms together into one larger form that combines a bunch of their attributes. Um, yeah, and Steven basically becomes obsessed with this for the rest of the episode, and that's basically his main goal, is he needs to see this fusion ASAP without any fail or hesitation. At that moment, Garnet comes back to tell them about a mission that they need to do to find. Was it two heavenly beetles, or was it
Just the
like a
Heavenly Beetle.
just heavenly beetles? Yeah, she goes into a lava lake for her beetle, and she sends Pearl, Amethyst, and Steven to find the other heavenly beetle. I think it was a heavenly beetle of earth and heavenly beetle of air. Was that the correct? I think it
Earthly
was.
Beetle and then the Heavenly Beetle.
Oh, yes. Okay, yes, that makes more sense. Uh, mm, Garnet puts on a cute and silly little pair of goggles that go over her hair, over her visor, uh, which begged the question if it was really needed, but it was cute, so I liked it. And basically, the big chunk of the rest of the episode is Steven uh, basically just begging Pearl and Amethyst to fuse together into Opal. They run into a goat. Steven gets on his knees and says the danger is too great. You need to form Opal right now or else we'll all die. It was just a goat.
By the
Um
way, he ended up being right about that.
yeah. uh fuse or else it'll kill us all.
Pretty much.
That's fair. Yeah, that's the good structure. But what comes next is what I believe is the first sung show, a sung song of the show. I look back through our notes and
The
I don't.
first musical number.
Yeah, the first musical number where Steven just sings that he wants to see them
Actually,
turn.
no! The first musical number is technically Let Me Drive My Van Into Your Heart. It's just very
Oh, you're
sub.
right.
It's just a
You're right.
very. It's a very diegetic,
That's a good point.
very
I
diegetic
guess this
one.
is the first. Well, I mean, technically it's diegetic, but all the music that happens in the background is non-diegetic. So this is the first
Musical
non.
number sequence.
Yeah, I guess is the best way to put it. So Steven just sings that he wants to see Opal the giant woman. Uh, and like parts of it mention that if he could be a giant woman, he could. We got to make sure Steven gets on estrogen later in life so it can be Samantha's universe and we're all living in it or something. Um,
It's Samantha's universe. We're all living in it.
in it. Yes, and that's just about the time when they manage to go upon the home of the Heavenly Beetle, which does have an admittedly pretty funny sight gag where they peer into the tiny temple that the beetle lives in, and it's got like a regular apartment inside of it with like little dumb bongos and a
Well,
video
it
game
is
console.
implied to be a gem like creature, so chances
Yeah,
are that this beetle
it's
is
sentient.
well, I can't like because if I say too much, I'm gonna spoil like it for people who are watching it. But the implication is that this beetle, much like the corrupted monsters that the gems have been fighting, have deeper underlying psychological going ons that the audience is not privy to at this point in time.
Yes, because what beetle would willingly play the bongos? A sick one in the head, that is. Uh,
I can talk about four Beatles who would play the bongos.
and if they were ever in my line of sight while I was driving the car, it would be over. Anyway.
Yoko, oh
Yeah.
no.
But at that point, the beetle just isn't anywhere, and in the confusion, they're attacked by a giant bird. It kind of looks like a vulture, but it's just like got just a mouth instead of the rest of the head. And Amethyst and Pearl finally try to sync up when it comes to turning into Opal, but just find that no matter how they try, they inevitably start bickering. Uh, or like can't just synchronize them if they're trying it on purpose, which leads to Steven getting swallowed by the bird. He manages to find the beetle inside of the bird, and that's when large hands start piercing the stomach of the bird's insides to grab Steven and pull him out. And also the goat Steven Jr., which has been sort of the marketable plushy animal joke that Steven calls his son in the episode. And that's when the design of Opal is revealed, and it is like a relative fusion of Amethyst and Pearl's qualities, where it's a very tall, mostly lanky woman, to be honest, but she has like four arms and kind of light bluish purplish tone to her. And when she manages to attack the bird and split into a bunch of little birds, she combines Pearl and Amethyst's weapons into a bow and manages to pierce and destroy all of the little tiny birds. Stephen, unsure of how this works, asks if Opal knows him, and Opal sings a few of the lyrics from Giant Woman back to Stephen, and Stephen is overjoyed. They go back to the house, show Garnet, come back. Garnet asks how everything went and how they got the beetle, where Opal quickly realizes that she didn't actually get the beetle and unfuses back into Amethyst and Pearl and that's when Steven reveals that he got the beetle when no one was looking. Garnet congratulates Steven for getting it and helping Amethyst and Pearl fuse, and casually drops the bomb that Steven probably confused too in the future. And that's the episode end. So Alex, it's interesting because I feel that we had very two contrasting opinions on this episode already, which is
Actually, I
interesting.
think our opinions basically are the same, just stated in very, very different ways.
I suppose that's fair. This is the very introduction of fusion, so we're probably going to start discussing it in length. But From this very first sync point, it sort of comes across to us at least as based on how Pearl and Amethyst.
Actually,
Uh,
based on their entire presentation, this episode, how it's handled in the beginning, the metaphors, the way they talk to each other, it is very heavily suggested that fusion is a metaphor for strong physical intimacy, if you catch my drift.
that's fair. At the very least, at the beginning, there is something where synchronizing is in reference to their dances, though we don't actually see them dance to actually successfully form into opal. So we'll have to wait until we
And
see a.
there are heavy, heavy undertones in the dance that we see. Like there, the whole episode has a very strong undercurrent of like physical intimacy that cannot really be ignored. Like it's rather overt. And
It
I think this leads into a bigger problem with Steven Universe as a whole, where they introduce a concept, but they don't flesh it out well enough. So when they try to expand on that concept,
like
they
turn into a
do it.
giant woman.
Hmm.
Sorry, you said expand.
So when they want to expand this concept further into areas that don't areas that would very strongly suggest non non relationships of intense physical intimacy, the execution is less than it leaves a lot to be desired. It is less than perfect. Not that it needed to be perfect, but it raises a lot of questions in a way that Steven Universe should not be inviting.
We'll talk about it as it goes on, how it's being built up, but admittedly, with how the episode starts, it does come across as sort of like a ex relationship struggling to form coherency with each other.
Like
Is it?
everybody, I haven't even talked about like the even seedier implications of this episode, and we are purposefully omitting that. You guys can talk about it in the comments if y'all want, but
Or not? I don't particularly mind. Well, I mean, I guess it would be
it's the
nice
internet.
considering.
We kind of have to prepare for it.
I guess that's a good point. Yeah. Uh, but so like we've said before, we've been me as in Trans Panda and Annie have partially been brought on to this podcast to discuss the implications of Steven Universe in regards to the element of plurality that we currently live with. We are diagnosed with other specified dissociative disorder 1B, which means that we are essentially multiple people coexisting in one body, but without any memory loss, which would normally be one of the qualifications that is required for the step above OSDD, which is dissociative identity disorder. Now, what's interesting about fusions in this show, and I'm fairly positive this is how it's going to be outright, is there will be no fusions that really overlap with the DID experience, and it would be something more akin to other specified dissociative disorder plurality, because as Opal showed, they inherently know the memories of the original entities that went into it. So memory loss is out of the question, and I would pretty strongly say that this would fall under the OSDD umbrella of plurality, or technically endogenic, considering technically no trauma, but that's a whole other deal to get with. Well, you know what I mean.
Yes.
Okay. Um, I guess we could say like our very first impressions when it comes to revisiting
Oh,
with
before we
plurality.
continue, there's
Oh yeah,
also
go ahead.
foreshadowing for something that Pearl does a little later. That's if you've watched the series, it's one of the most infamous things she does.
Oh
So that'll
yeah.
be something to look out for.
Yay. Um, but yes. So fusion in this case is we don't get to see much of Opal. She doesn't really have many lines yet to speak of. She only had like two basically, which was hold still and all I want to do is see you turn into a giant woman.
She also
Um,
says, I don't have it.
oh yes, so we're 3 for 3, really knocking it out of the park so far. Um, but as an introduction to fusions, we don't personally mind this, but it's funny because Stephen asks a lot of questions, but it doesn't exactly but Amethyst and Pearl don't exactly answer any of them for Stephen, which is kind of funny. Um, so how would we approach this from a plural perspective? And we think it's fair that at the time this was made, they probably weren't making it with plurality in mind, simply because plurality is really, whilst it is very mainstream, it is also seen more as a fantasy whimsical like inclusion in a story more so than a possible allusion to a real life condition.
That
Uh,
is true. I do not think Steven Universe has ever been including plurality as a conscious design decision, but I thought it was important to bring Jill on because Steven Universe can be interpreted in these ways, and I wanted to open the doors to those sorts of perspectives. Go ahead, Annie.
yeah, it's easy to interpret fusion. I mean, in the most literal sense, it is literally more than one person in one body. So, blah. What I will say is it's a little unclear at the moment where if there is a divide or not. So do you know what integration is, Alex? Or
I
if you
feel like I have a very baseline knowledge of what integration is.
Okay, so something that happens in plural communities is when they go to a therapist or psychologist or your typical Joe Schmo with limited knowledge, there's sort of this unspoken rule that the logical endpoint.
Oh yes, yes, we have talked about this before. Yes, I remember
Yes,
this.
with
I
cat
just didn't.
fingers.
I just haven't memorized the term, but we have absolutely talked about this before.
Well, cat fingers, I think, is actually on a different level because cat fingers is one of the two options, actually, that people sort of first think of. And it's either suppression or final fusion slash integration. And suppression is basically what happened in cat fingers, where there's clearly multiple conscious entities there, but the solution when somebody says that like you can't cure plurality, then their solution is okay, let's bury them in a box for the rest of all time then, because that's the only way we could physically imagine an entity being healthy is that it has to be only one being in control of the body at a time.
Wow, Jill, that sounds incredibly productive and not incredibly self-destructive.
Yeah, it's funny. We've actually talked to like our singlet friend. I'm not gonna name him, but he's talked before that like it shows such a self-destructive idea of the human brain where you can just single out a part of your mind and just bottle it up and surgically cut it out and somehow the problem magically goes away when all you're really doing is making the problem worse in the long run at best. Um, so that's suppression. and I think that's should be all about what we talk about that with this episode because it's not really relevant. But the other solution to plurality that is most often brought up in media and such is the idea of a final fusion or integration. And what this means is that you've heard Fallen and Wraith and Roxas voiced yesterday, right?
Yes, Roxas was
Alex?
yesterday. They were good.
Yes, right. Just
It
making
was
sure I
them.
remember right. Yes, Zazem because X is funny for Kingdom Hearts. Um,
All right.
but integration is the implication of if it's uh it's a bit hard to describe. It's basically just yes, there is no more alters and they just form into one being. Both on the outside in the external body and the internal body is one entity. So if I, Annie, Fallen, Roxas, and Wraith all integrated or did final fusion, we would essentially all morph or like shift, not shift, we would bleed into each other until we become this sort of newish person, which is all of us. And the implication is that we're not supposed to go to separate altars after that. And why I bring that up is that with fusion, since it is so largely playing in the more metaphorical, whimsical space, it is somewhat unclear where the line is exactly tiptoeing. Is this like two people piloting like a mech in like a Pacific Rim, or is it that final fusion that we were talking about? They split up at the end, but since this is like whimsical fantasy, is is Opal genuinely like the the integration fusion name, and there in that moment in time genuinely no strong difference between amethyst and pearl in that moment because they blended so seamlessly together of sorts. And again, this is probably just because we haven't really gone to see much of Opal, and she was very focused on doing one action, so it's probably why she was so focused on that. But it does bring a lot of questions at the moment that are interesting to bring in the greater context of plurality and media as a whole, which we're very interested to dive deeper into as the series progresses. We will say that how the fusions operate is that the implication is that eventually they will most likely unfuse in the end when they no longer synchronize or something of that matter. So it's sort of be an integration that breaks apart, which does happen with systems like us, is somebody will attempt final fusion or something like that, but later down the line, they may split apart again for a whole host of reasons. And um, yeah, or sometimes say, well, it's I guess it's also interesting because much like how we're interpreting the fusions of Steven Universe so far, it may be operating on a spectrum more so than a strong, hard defined rule. But we'll see how it progresses as time goes on. Right, Alex?
Y'all are gonna love the polyamory worm.
You keep saying that and we'll get there when we get there. I don't know who should be the one fronting for that. We debated if some of our like bigger alters in headspace should be fronting for this, or like Helen, who's like 10 feet tall, or Fallen, who has cut her chimera form at like 12 feet 3 tons or something.
That's true. That would have been really funny. I was actually thinking I was going to see Helen for this, but
I
it's
guess
probably for the better that I don't bring her on for this episode, considering the things I said about it off script that you guys will
that's
never hear.
fair. That you never, ever, never hear unless you fuse with one of us, baby. So get your dancing shoes on
Me
and
starts dancing, starts becoming ready to embrace being a system.
yay. The new hot trend hitting the kids, being systems, which yes, actually. I think that is kind of working. But regardless, um you
I've run through all of my notes, so I'm good.
yes, I think we're basically done with our thought process so far. Uh Basically how we would sum it up is like we're at the introduction. We'll keep seeing how it goes further as time goes on because I think it's fair to say that it just needs more clarification now.
It's not
And
gonna get that.
well, we'll see how much I can extract from it as a system ourselves.
I'm sorry, this might be inappropriate and it might be spoilery, but it's not gonna get better.
Understandable. Have a good day.
Seriously though, have a good day, everyone.
Yeah, you can find me, Annie Transpanda, on Tumblr at Transpanda1.
My name is Alex. You don't want my social media.
Well, that's it for Giant Woman. Tune in for next episode.
Well, that's
Bye
technically
bye.
not really it for Giant Woman, but we will revisit this concept in the future, and we're actually going to revisit it pretty soon. All right,
Get
good
ready
night,
for
everyone.
get ready for the sequel to Giant Woman, Giant Women.
Giant
Yeah.
Women 2, The Electric Boogaloo.
Okay. Bye bye, everyone. Thank you for existing.
Good night, everyone.
If I could begin to be half of what you think of me, I could do about anything. I could even learn how to love like you.